I'll be happy to do it if you want me to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
The hat didn't make it to the back row or any of that.
Pardon?
The hat didn't make it down
To
here.
the
Maybe they can start in the back and work forward.
Okay.
But it's oh, the hat, I'm sorry.
We already did it.
Oh, you did.
For questions.
All right, so, okay.
All right, so
And we need a time limit of 2 minutes?
2 minutes is good. Let's start with the front row. Norma?
Hey, Jim.
Hi.
As regards Africa and U.S. sending in troops, they send in propaganda, and that's the big thing, is they're telling us that the worthless people in Africa are being invaded by the terrible communists from China. And people believe it, you know, they're really still there for that kind of bad information. And that China is invading in the same quality and the same tactics as the U.S. does, which is the total opposite of what the exchange is there. As Jim said, China is helping build infrastructure that belongs to the people and hires the people that live there to do the work. So we have neoliberalism and gentrification equal a stage of capitalism, period. The fight for democracy, people are confused about democracy is the tool to work for the equalization and so forth, to work for the struggle. For me, I say to work for the struggle to build socialism. But it's not the structure. And people need to, I think, have it. Instead of going like, give us democracy, give us democracy. No, we want the socialist structure of society, so forth, and we want to be able to employ the tool of democracy to do it. And I think that it's worth clearing that up with people. That book sounds wonderful, by the way. You've well identified that the process of gentrification makes our neighbors into our enemies. And that's part of the chaos that's going on that we live with now. And of course that gives the police the right to kill bad people, especially black. They've made the square buildings into desirable architecture. The state of loving Mies van der Rohe. I mean, they quote that Mies van der Rohe is a worthy architect, and he's not. He's just building these square places that take the place of interesting architecture, lovely architecture.
They look like prisons. They look like prisons.
They're just horrible. And the garbage from homeless, the homeless quote, are being accused of creating. Oh, they throw all that garbage.
30 seconds left.
You know that as though there isn't a reason for the garbage being there, one of which is that it doesn't get picked up by the municipality.
Because they have to pay waste management if they will.
Well, yeah.
In 2 minutes. Well, shall I keep taking?
Okay. Do you want to answer one at a
Let
time?
me just quickly say a couple of things about that. The U.S. military now has a division called the Africa Command, and it's to coordinate all their military adventures in the continent of Africa. And I think we all remember what happened with Libya, where Gaddafi was planning to create an Africa-wide development bank with a starting endowment of $1 billion. And I think that was probably one of the reasons why he was, attacked so brutally. And Libya now has slavery, which is a horrible reversal in the timeline. there are forces, neoconservatives, who do not want Africa to develop, except on terms that are friendly to the U.S., obviously. Democracy, of course, has to have a context. You can't just have, oh, we want democracy. But it should be working class democracy, where working class people have a say in what goes on in their workplace, not, you know, a real say, a decision-making say in what goes on in the workplace and what goes on in their community. Because one thing I learned in researching the book and being involved in the gentrification fight is it was very reminiscent of union struggles. It's just a different context, you know. Instead of one employer, you have the whole community. And in both of those, we don't have enough democracy. We don't have enough, even in many union environments. We need more democracy than we have, and certainly in the community, which is more amorphous, you need much more democracy. And you mentioned gentrification can make friends into enemies. Well, probably, you know, they weren't friends to begin with if they're become enemies over gentrification, because that means they side with the wealthy class. And if it's a working class struggle, you're gonna lose some people, but you're gonna gain other people who never were involved in any kind of struggle in their lives, because they don't have to go anywhere. They don't step outside and they're part of the struggle. So I wouldn't be afraid of that. I would say the more the merrier, and the more groups that are involved in the struggle, the better. It shouldn't be a monolithic struggle of one group against the developers. It should be, you know, everybody who has some kind of thing going on. We had a surfers group in Venice that was fighting gentrification, and, you know, things like that. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Is moving this way?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that the situation in Oakland is well, I've read, you know, a lot about Mike Davis's book, you know, City of Quartz, etc. You know, so I knew, and I was born in Los Angeles. I know
Do you
some
think
stuff about
people can hear you?
Do you want me to use it?
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So
I'm sorry, did you answer me?
I'm sorry, but what?
Did you, do you think people can hear you? They can't hear you over
Well, yeah, the tone of that we'll have to discuss later, but yes, I'll say it again. You know, I'm fairly familiar with LA's situation, but there's some, I wouldn't say unique, but there are some situations in Oakland that are really very, very oppressive. If you own a house, which I do, you can just barely make what are called parcel tax payments. So you've got to, I think it's a 60-40 split still, it's about 40% homeowners. It is very hard to do home repairs, keep your home up, and pay the Oakland city government, okay? And I mean, I worked on rent control, and I did change the rent laws here to cap the rents at 3%, and then we went, and then we did it through the media, but then bought a house thinking it would be less onerous than being a tenant. It's unbelievably expensive to keep up a house with, you know, that's 100 years old or 75
Right.
years old, and which I have. But now I see my bank statements going way down. I'm having a guy worked on for 7 months, and then I have to pay something like $5,000 a year, period. And it goes up to 10 grand, you know, it depends on the value of your house, to this Oakland city government. And
30 seconds left.
pardon?
30 seconds left.
Yeah, so this is an onerous thing on homeowners. And as to relations, to, you know, this natural relationship in neighborhoods, there's a heck of a lot of race stuff that goes on here in Oakland, and it's against Caucasians, you know, too. So you have to factor in. You don't have one size fit all that from another city. You have some things that are, I wouldn't say unique, but are really very locally specific. And this whole thing about how should I say it? The taxes, the parcel tax, which are parcel property taxes, is enough to just discourage you from even owning a house or keeping it up. You know.
It is.
Yeah.
My house went from $65,000 to $780,000.
And did the tax go up?
That's irrelevant. The point is that
It's irrelevant? How's it irrelevant?
Well,
Well, just a short comment on
Well,
this.
no, I didn't understand that.
I mean,
That was-
that's an incentive. All these problems you mentioned are an incentive to sell and move to another area. And what's going to happen is somebody probably much more wealthy is going to move in, and
And pay
that's
the
going to
taxes.
gentrify.
Yeah, and it just goes up
Neighborhood.
every year,
Yeah.
you know? So,
that's the taxes. That's
Okay.
that's Oakland.
I think we have the
It's
next
different than
person here.
Berkeley.
Let's hear.
California.
No,
We'll come back to you. How about you, Rich?
Let me try to settle down to one. I got about 5 or 10 questions. Okay, so I'll start this one. So, sorry. So, well, I want to say 2 things about the book, the name, and the content.
If you
Thank you,
get them to
first of all.
speak
It's
into
a
the
great talk.
microphone,
And
use
if the
your
book's,
voice.
yeah,
If
once
it
you talk
reflects
to the
the-
mic, great.
if the book reflects your talk, I assume it does. I expect a great book. So, I want to be self-critical, not myself of ourselves, and not of an individual, but the way we framed this talk today is partly based on the name of the book, or it's about Venice. It's not really about Venice. I mean, you're about Venice. You live in Venice. All your people. It's really about gentrification and the economy, the neoliberal, best neoliberal definition I can think of over an hour's time that I've got of all the talks we had. People just throw the word out like you're supposed to know what it means.
Right.
And I like you saying that finance capital, okay, I know what that means. Maybe most of, I don't know, we don't talk about finance capital that much as we should. So I think it wasn't clear. People that should be here today don't want to talk about surfers in Venice. It's misleading. That's all I'm saying. I'm not picking on anybody. I'm just saying a lot of people should have been here today. I know that's me. I'm losing my voice. A lot of people should have been here today, but were not presented a clear description of what was going to happen today. So I'm thinking about the future, that we be careful to limit. And we'll have a meeting in a half an hour. Okay, so the second one is totally related.
30
Okay, so I
seconds.
want to ask in general,
30 seconds.
is Venice, how many Venices, I mean, there's a lot of beach, but there's not that many communities. There's no community like Venice in LA that I know. It's very special historically and everything, but are there a number of groups that are organizing around getting kicked out of their, the whole thing? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Are there 5, 10, 20? You said work across interest groups. I definitely
Right.
agree. Make a broad coalition, a united front, whatever you want to call it. But then around the city, it's a huge city.
That's 2 minutes.
I'm
I
just-
stopped at 2 minutes
It's a little
and
bit
I'd like,
louder,
But you're
Nora.
still going. Thank you. You
Yeah,
understand.
I think I get your point. In this country, we're taught not to associate and organize with other people. And so it's something we have to learn to do. In some areas, people are pretty quick on the uptake. In others, you could run over them with a construction vehicle. But there are other communities. Like in LA, there's East LA and Boyle Heights, which are both predominantly Latino areas, which are confronted with gentrification and or fighting back. And there's other places, Echo Park, Silver Lake. I mean, it's like if you may not notice it if you just drive down the street, but if you really look into it, I don't think there's a city in the country where there is not some gentrification going on, and there is a struggle against it. But it's like the lowest level of struggle in some ways. I mean, if somebody gets in a union, they have a structure where they can learn how to struggle and go on strike and stuff like that. If it's a political thing, like if you're for a particular political candidate, you will learn quickly how to be knock on doors and you send out mailings or whatever. But with gentrification, it's kind of self-taught, but it's also kind of the ground spring for recruiting more activists. You know, we can't have socialism in this country. Like me, you want that to happen unless we communicate with each other. You can't vote it in because, you know, with all due respect to Bernie and Tulsi, you know, their election is not going to bring about socialism. You need to have a mass movement, and you can see this in other countries. You need a mass movement that comes out of the neighborhoods, out of the unions, and so on. And we focus a lot on unions, you know, trying to make them more class conscious. But we don't focus much on neighborhoods. And that's what we have to do if we really want to change society.
Agreed.
So.
Okay, Rich,
Okay.
it's your turn.
Could you close the door?
There.
Thank you. Just one point and a question. On a global level, the anti-neoliberal and neo-conservative bloc in the world, led by Russia and China, are making advances. So yesterday I read that the Prime Minister of Russia was in Cuba, and he was also in Venezuela, and he signed big agreements, cooperation, defense, similarly to what they did in Syria. They plan to defend those countries. Now the question I have about your book is, I appreciate very much the fact that you put gentrification in the context of the development of capitalism to the neoliberal stage, and that gentrification can only be defeated. I take it to imply that gentrification can only be defeated if capitalism is overthrown in some respects.
Yeah.
So that creates a dilemma, which is, you know, if you're not, you get what I mean. It's because we're not, you're struggling against gentrification, but you know that it cannot be defeated until leadership is done. Same with the trade union movement, actually. Anyway, so you talk about some of the tactics, you mentioned in your book, title of the book, some of the tactics that we used for the struggle. Maybe you could just refer to some of them that you think are important. Just one, maybe.
Yeah, I didn't have enough time really to get into the kind of tactics. You know, if this was a group of people who were right now fighting gentrification, I probably would have concentrated on that. But while you're going to have gentrification as long as you have neoliberalism and capitalism, that doesn't mean that you can't defeat individual instances of gentrification with a concerted struggle. And every time there's some assault of gentrification, there should be a fight against it, because not only for the fight in itself, but also because this is how people learn to struggle and stand up and fight. And what we need in this country more than anything, I think, is people who are willing to do that. Too many people just have an attitude that, oh, there's nothing you can do. You know, the rich decide everything, and what good would it do for me to, you know, walk a picket line in front of some construction site? A lot of good for that person, because they would learn, hey, this is fun, you know, this is how I get to know my neighbors. And so gentrification has a real role to play, not just for itself, but for the overall struggle.
Right.
I have a
You go ahead. So, who's on?
I have a few questions.
Is it up? It's on.
I don't think so.
It was on when I had it.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
I have a few questions. The time should start now.
Good.
What's your name?
It doesn't matter. So, you mentioned that in the .com sector, the technology sector, there are a lot of non-productive forces. And can you give some examples of that? We all know about real estate and beside the people who play games that obviously don't produce anything, but that, and then also the term middle class, from an economics standpoint, isn't that fictitious? Like there's no such thing really, middle class. And then I also wanted to hear, because I am connected with activists who are, you know, we occupied and were successful. A friend of mine, Bank of America, had pretty much tricked them into taking over their house in LA, and through Occupy, she was able to save her house. And so I just want to know, what are some of those tools? Thank you.
Well, I would say buy the book.
That's a
It's all in there. But seriously, non-productive sector is number one Wall Street.